Hey there, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit of an interesting extension. I mean, we our last few lectures have sort of been this interesting extension on the history of psychology, and have been actually sort of like the modern state of psychology and where we're at today, which is, of course, the end of the history. Um, at the moment, what we find is, in fact, that there are 53, the APA is the American Psychological Association, there are 53 divisions or 53 different groups of people that think that they are different from the other 52 enough that they need to get into their own little cliques and talk together. Yeah, okay. Um, all right. Let me in fact step back instead. Let me show you this. I made these pictures here just for this slideshow, and I made them in my car. And so if they suck, whatever. Okay, hopefully they'll get the message. Here's a little picture. You see this? It's like a Venn diagram or something. Okay, and this circle represents the world of knowledge, and in the time of say Aristotle, right? This is the way the world was viewed. The world of knowledge was just a coherent whole thing. That Aristotle, when you ask Aristotle, so what do you do? And he says, I think, I learn things, and that's wonderful. Okay, but later on, what happened was this little pie called knowledge, right, got chunked up a little bit. All right. And these different ways of attaining knowledge, and I mean, we probably talked about this way early in chapter 1 or something, but these three different ways of learning and knowing things were somehow seen as distinctly different. That if somebody studied religion, then they didn't study philosophy, and then if they studied that, they didn't study science. And so this world of knowledge was broken up into this chunks, three chunks, okay? And things that are outside of your little slice became um not worthy of study. Okay? Now, this is all fine and dandy, but then what happened was, now, in this next picture, I made a triangle because I couldn't make a semicircle. Whatever, blame Microsoft PowerPoint. So, imagine this is that pie piece from the previous image, okay? And so this is the pie piece that represented science. And see, what would happen was that at some point, somebody decided this world of knowledge that we call science has become so large that we need to break it apart and start talking about it separately. And in fact, going back to this one, I still remember when I was in I think it might have been my history of psychology class. I can't remember for sure. But I was asked to write about a scientist that I admired. And the one I picked, and I always got to be careful because whatever, was Francis Galton. And I picked Francis Galton not because of his eugenics, but I picked Francis Galton because he was the last person that really qualified as a scientist. Okay, he did not make distinctions between the realm of biology versus the realm of chemistry versus the realm. He was interested in the entire story. Okay, and so the last scientist in this traditional sense was probably Galton. And after Galton, what happened was this world of science became too big, and so it became divided. Now, clearly, there are more divisions to this thing called science than this, okay? At first, perhaps there would have been a breakdown between physical sciences and natural sciences, or a breakdown physical sciences and social sciences, or perhaps a breakdown between um, the biological sciences versus the earth sciences or something like that. I don't know what the distinction is, but I've picked a few here, okay? And I'm drawing this as a pie, but I think that maybe it would have to be better portrayed as a three-dimensional image. I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but if you take a look, what happens is there's this little slice of this pie. This the entire pie piece represented here represents the world of science knowledge, right? And of that science knowledge, a small little sliver belongs to us in psychology. Now, we find that there are other disciplines such as sociology and biology that might sit right next door to us, and they're very similar to us, right? They're asking similar questions, they're touching on similar subject matter, but clearly, and in fact, at the border between psychology and sociology, we find that it's not clear. It's not clear, this line, I put it as a solid line, but it's really more of a dashed line or something, right? Because who knows where one ends and one begins. But once you get over to the middle of that, it's clear. And I mean, it's like I said, this needs to be a three-dimensional image, because really there are elements of psychology that overlap immensely with anthropology. And of course, in my drawing, it doesn't touch it, and that's not what I want to imply. I want to imply more of a three-dimensional thing. So I guess you'd have to imagine a sphere of some type. And so clearly there are elements of anthropology that are not related to psychology, but a whole lot of it is. And so we find this overlap between these things, and we find, though, that things that are outside this realm, outside the realm of your study. So if somebody is a psychologist, they usually are not terribly interested in chemistry. All right, and I mean, this is a shame. This is a shame. But this is what's happening with you guys at the undergraduate level. Is you're taking these GEC courses, these general education courses, and they're being taught by faculty members that think very narrowly. They think in their own discipline, and they present their own discipline as though it could somehow be a standalone discipline. Now, I don't know how else to teach biology without teaching it as though it were a standalone discipline. But the fact is that biology is not a standalone discipline. Clearly, I mean, we know that chemistry and biology overlap immensely. Biology and psychology overlap immensely. You can't exactly learn biology without it, yet we teach it as though it makes sense to have a separate department of biology. Why? Because the world of knowledge becomes so large that nobody can be like Francis Galton, some kind of just general scientist. You can't do it. There's just too much. Well, way back when these divisions started to emerge, the very first textbook in psychology, whatever, one of the first ones was William James's textbook. Remember that? The Principles of Psychology? I guess his first book was just called Psychology, and it was about 1,000 pages. And then he wrote a brief version of it and called it Principles of Psychology, and it was 500 words. But anyway, when he submitted a 1,000-page text to the publisher, he also sent in a little note, an apology note, saying, "I'm sorry for creating such a disgusting, bloated monster. There is no discipline that is worthy of 1,000 pages. Okay, I apologize up front." Now, clearly, 1,000 pages wouldn't cut it today. I mean, half of your textbooks are 1,000 pages, and those are introduction to whatever that particular subdiscipline is. And so the world of knowledge has gotten larger and larger and larger, and the larger it gets, the smaller chunk of the pie. Now, again, you got to imagine this little slice of pie that's called psychology. Imagine that little slice is represented here, and I'm going to slice it up again. I'm going to say, here's clinical psychology, here's counseling psychology, here's developmental psychology, here's social psych, here's cognitive psych, here's biological psych. And again, what's happening is that so many of the times when you guys, and I mean, it's not really your fault, it's a product of the educational system, but you'll get out of one of your, in fact, one of the main reasons I put together the senior capstone course for our department is because what students would do is they would come out and say, "I took 12 psychology classes," and I would just be aghast and say, "You did not take 12 psychology classes. You took one psychology major in which you took 12 different approaches to one discipline." All right? But people weren't seeing that. My students, my advisees were not picking up on this idea that there was one coherent story. And so the big picture is being lost because of this. And it's too bad, because here I am, let's say, for example, as an example, my undergraduate degree was in psychology. Great. Then in my master's degree, they forced me to specialize some. So I became experimental psychology. Then in my PhD, they forced me to specialize some more, and I became experimental psychology, subdiscipline cognitive psychology within the realm of experimental psychology. And within the realm of cognitive psychology, focusing on the sub area, I don't know where I'm at this point, sub area called judgment and decision making. That's what my actual PhD is in, judgment and decision making. And even within the realm of judgment and decision making, which is a subfield of cognitive, which is a subfield of experimental, which is a subfield of psychology, I'm forced to then specialize my research focus on, for me anyway, self-controlled decision making. And so all of a sudden I've been so narrowed down. Okay, and I'll tell you that at many universities in the United States, this is a matter of fact. Okay, before I came to Texas Wesleyan, I was at a very, very large university, and we had about 35 full-time tenure-track faculty members, as well as another 15 or 20 adjuncts or temporary people and things like this. And so what happened is there was everybody was an expert in something. And so, let's say, for example, if I wanted to teach a biological psychology class up at that big university, somebody would have said, no, my degree is in biological psychology. Of course I'm going to teach it. And then I say, okay, fine. Then I'll teach social psychology. And another professor would say, no, that's my area, so you can't teach that. And so I ended up teaching the experimental psychology course over and over and over, with statistics over and over and over, and then throw in history of psychology once in a while, okay? So, but, I mean, I couldn't teach anything else because it was somebody else's property, somebody else's slice of the pie. Now that I've been working at Wesleyan now for a while, I'm been so lucky because I've been able to teach so many different courses. I mean, I think I've had at least 15 different courses at this point in counting, and it's awesome because you cannot imagine the connections that you're missing. The knowledge that you learn from developmental psychology, which is appropriate in social, which is appropriate in clinical, they're just so interrelated to each other, and yet when we finish one course, we forget that the other ones exist. Well, this trend towards increasing specialization seems to be getting worse rather than better, and that is a shame. But I'll tell you, that is something that I am lucky that I was able to escape from when I came to Wesleyan and was able to approach all of these different things. So, with that in mind, when you get into your capstone course, if you haven't already, that is going to be the theme. The theme is seeing the bigger picture, seeing wisdom, seeing how all of these different things tie together to tell one story, not 12 separate stories, okay? And I think that's an important skill for you guys to have, but one which the current state of the academic market is definitely fighting against. All right? I'll see you next time for our one last discussion, all right? Psychology moving into the future.